Chris, how's it going, brother?
It's going well, my friend. Thank you for having me on today.
I was just asking if you go by Doctor Chris, or are you one of those that really, hey, you got to make sure you call me a doctor?
Yeah, as the saying goes, you can call me anything, just don't call me late for dinner.
All right. Well, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know I gave the
Yeah.
lead in with the doctor thing there, but yeah, who are you and what have you been up to over the last couple of years and months?
Yeah. So, I'm Chris Gray, obviously. My company is the Bicologist, and I am bit of an oddball out there. I was trained as a psychologist many years ago. As I was wrapping up my doctorate, I realized I didn't love being a therapist, and that was really the crutch of my education. Everything was geared towards being a clinician,
Mm.
and so you can imagine after all that investment of time, energy, money, and frustration.
Yeah, how many years of school is that total?
Let's see. Well, I I finished my doctorate when I was 29, so
Okay.
I was, and that's
So you
all
start
but
like
1 year.
18 essentially and go all the way
Yeah.
to there.
Yeah, I took a gap year after college, and then went right from there. So, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort. Fortunately, I had some great mentors who, were psychologists who also did some business consulting, and so
Mm.
that's how I started to get my feet wet. And, I led my first focus group and just really fell in love with that whole process of being a qualitative researcher and having the ability to just have conversations with people to learn about their lives. And it's like you kind of parachute into people's lives and you get to, understand them and be curious about them and ask a whole bunch of questions and listen a whole bunch. And then, use that to help create something good, and that's really been the focus of what I do. So I've been working in a psychologist who's been working in sales and marketing for just over 30 years now. Hard
Wow.
to believe, but yeah, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the biggest and greatest brands in the world. And it is all focused on how do you develop such an understanding of your target customer that you are able to align your brand with their inner world, their needs, their aspirations, their frustrations, their desires, so that you can influence them in a way that creates wins not only for yourself but also for them. And that's really the key piece here. The my tagline for my company, The Bicologist, is influence customer behavior without feeling gross.
Mhm.
The without feeling gross part is not just being ethical, which I care about, but it's also about how do you add value, create wins for other people, do things so that they really genuinely feel connected with your brand.
Mm.
um, and you don't do that through manipulation and tricks. And so about 5 or so years ago, I decided to branch out on my own after many years in agency world, and, have just been chugging along ever since, and it's just been a fascinating journey. I can honestly say I have never been bored a day in my life. People are endlessly fascinating, and I love helping my clients solve problems, using what I know.
So take me back to when you're kind of finishing school and you're making this realization that like I don't know if I want to. I mean, what would a day to day have looked like if you were to kind of do the classical psychologist? Is it like what we're all imagining? You're sitting in the leather chair, or I'm telling you my problems, you're answering my questions.
That would have been primarily, yeah, because the program that I went to was, when you're working in graduate school, and in psychology, the main paths, there's two main branches. Like one is research, and the other is being a therapist or a clinician.
Okay.
Um, and at least at the time when I was going to school, like they were very separate. Most schools focus on the research aspect of it, with a little bit of the clinician side thrown in. And
Hmm.
I really wanted to be a clinician. And so I chose that path, and it's just funny that, I at the very tail end of it, realized I didn't love it, and actually I do a lot of research now, which is funny, but I think it's helpful because I think about it like a clinician, and I think that has been very like, an important aspect of my success.
What's the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist? I'm just, like, stewing that in my head, and I'm like, I don't know
Yeah,
that if I know the
that's
answer
a
to
good
that.
question. It's a good question. I think a lot of people, misunderstand the difference. Essentially, it comes down to, psychiatrists can or MDs who can prescribe medication.
Got it.
So they are trained as, um, they are trained as physicians, um, and their focus is on mental health or mental illness, what have you.
Got it.
Whereas psychologist, although I think there are some programs now for psychologists that you can, get prescription, rights. I'm not sure how widespread that is now, but I know it's always been kind of a talking point. But still, you're focused. You're not trained as a physician. You're trained as someone who specializes in understanding the mind.
So if I was to have, like, a severe psychiatric condition like schizophrenia, I'm more so probably gonna go see a psychiatrist. Is that reasonable to say?
Yeah, I think you probably would see a combination.
Mm,
Most psychiatrists these days, and there may be some psychiatrists that bristle at this, but I think it's generally true. Most psychiatrists focus on the medication aspect and less on the therapy aspect.
mhm.
And so you would definitely go to a psychiatrist for your medication needs. If you had, for your therapy, for talk therapy, those kinds of things, you'd probably either go to a psychologist or like a licensed social worker or something like that.
Mm. Is it fair to say that, like, the psychiatry kinda just followed the more, like, medicalization and, like, let's give this person, medication route, where your field was, like, more like, let's try to understand the person and maybe get them to understand what they're not seeing?
Yeah, I certainly don't wanna malign any psychiatrist, but I think that their skill sets the skill sets are very different, I
Mhm.
think. One, where you're assessing from a medical standpoint, there are certain priorities, certain questions, certain, parameters that you're gonna work within versus a therapist is gonna have a whole different set of skills, questions, focus, that sort of thing that is gonna be based on, like, taking your time to get to know this person and understand their inner world and everything, where that's not necessarily the focus for psychiatrists.
Yeah.
They have to deal with the medical
Yeah,
aspect
maybe
of
this
it.
is a bad analogy, but, a surgeon is necessary if you have an emergency, like your gunshot, but, like, you don't need a physical therapist, if you just your knee hurts a little bit, like, you don't need a surgeon for that, you don't need a physical
Right,
therapist. So
right,
maybe
exactly.
that's a bad analogy, but you kinda get
I
my
think it's in the ballpark.
yeah. So how do you begin to think, "Okay, like, I don't wanna be in this, like, kind of, clinical setting," and then I'm sure there's sort of like a panic, like, "Well, geez, like,
Oh, yeah.
am I gonna become a
Oh, yeah.
construction worker? Like, well, where
Yeah.
is life going?"
I'm gonna live in a refrigerator box under a bridge somewhere.
Yeah, with a
Yeah,
good amount of debt, of course.
right.
But yeah, so, like, how does that process begin to stew around your mind, and how do you eventually find this business thing?
Well, to be forthright about it, it was the crux of it was that I didn't love it. Um, but the other aspects of it were kind of I was a symptom of the times that I was, coming into, attaining my doctorate. Was the late 90s, the transition that psychology went through from mid 80s to late 90s was pretty drastic, um, because of insurance companies getting involved.
Ooh,
And so, it really undercut what you could do for patients. Um, and I had some very, um, challenging experiences with insurance companies when I was, doing my internship and things like that. That probably opened the door for that. I had this sort of nagging feeling in my head, like, I don't know if I love this. And then these experiences happened where, like, I'm, arguing on the phone with a clerk from an insurance company telling me that, this teenager who slit her wrist, it wasn't a serious attempt because the cuts weren't long enough. And so she couldn't get inpatient help.
oh,
And it's just,
geez.
I don't like, I can't be, they can't do this my whole life. Like, this is not something that I want in my life.
Mm.
And so that really, that pushed it, to the point where I was like, I need to start looking at other options.
Yeah, a couple of guests ago was an individual, and we talked a lot about the healthcare business. And he wrote a book, I believe it's called "How to Fix Healthcare," and he recommended me
Ooh, yeah,
another book called "Crisis Care," and
mm,
it's kind of like seemingly like a seminal text about this. But it's really interesting. You probably like it because it's a lot of that, these little situations where like the medical system has gotten involved, and they've kind of made these decisions, which has resulted in things like that you kind of were seeing. And
yeah.
probably if you look back, you go, "I'm glad that I didn't have to deal with that on a day in and day out basis."
Yeah, it's, of course, every once in a while, like, you second guess yourself, like, oh, I could be doing whatever. But no, I've loved my career. I really have had just a fascinating career. I've worked with great people. I've worked with incredible brands. I've helped solve like fascinating challenges, um, using psychology. And yeah, so like I really have no regrets. Every once in a while, though, you think like, I could have my leather chair and like be seeing patients and stuff. But
So, how do you find this business world then? You said there was someone that you were studying under?
yeah. So actually, the chair of my dissertation kind of saw that I was going through something and took me aside, and so we talked a lot. And Um, she just said, "You're developing skills and perspectives that are going to help you in so many different arenas." And she literally said, "I do a little business consulting on the side from time to time, and would love to make some introductions for you." And that's kind of how I got started. Um, and so then I started just kind of um, apprenticing a little bit, if you will, like kind of hanging out with the people who are doing this stuff, and then I got my shot to lead a focus group, and that's just really when I was like, yeah, this is what I love. This is what I love to do. It's psychology, but it's just a different focus.
Do you remember what that first focus group was and what
Ah,
what
that's a great
problem they
question.
were attempting to solve?
Uh, I have trouble remembering exactly which one, but I was like right out of the gate because I was working with people who were already established. So like I worked with some of the first brands that I worked with. Like this is like mid to late 90s.
Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause was like Kellogg, Coca-Cola, who
those are some
else?
pretty good ones to start with.
United
I mean,
Airlines. Like, there's
when
like
you enter the scene working for
yeah.
Coca-Cola, it's
Yeah, I don't remember which one was first. Those 3 all popped kinda at the same time.
so maybe let me ask you a question then more generally. Why does like a multi-billion dollar brand like Coca-Cola need a psychologist? Where does that like come into
Right.
play? And maybe even take me back farther. Like, what's the history of this? I don't know if you know much about the history of businesses utilizing services like yours.
Yeah, my understanding, and I'm no like big expert on it, but I think it started somewhere in the 50s and 60s, when they started really working with actual psychologists. Now, psychology has always been a part of marketing. It's just that's it's its nature. Marketing is essentially psychology.
Mm.
Um, I think that the reason that companies want to work with a psychologist is because one, again, marketing, sales and marketing both are highly based in psychology. And if you get the psychology right, you are able to have sway and influence in a way that is not only um, ethical but also highly effective. In fact, I think like the work that I do. So the Bichologist, my logo or my tagline, as I said, is influence behavior without feeling gross. That's partially an ethical thing. Yes, I
Hmm.
want to sleep at night, but it's also because it's far more effective than tricking people and manipulating people who then feel frustrated or resentful or angry because they bought something they don't need or they were felt like they were pressured. Forming relationships with your customers is really the best way to go with that. And so I think that when you think about these big companies, there's a couple things. One is, trying to align their brand with the inner world of their customers and understand like what are their needs, what are their aspirations, what do they care about that we can credibly connect to, right? Because there's obviously always going to be some things if you're a brand, like you may learn some things about your customer's inner world that like, okay, we couldn't possibly connect with that. But you're going to find a whole bunch of other things as well that you can. And so when you're able to make those connections, that's extremely powerful, because what you're doing is you're inviting people into being a part of your brand. And if you don't get the psychology right around that, they're not going to want to, because we don't, we want to be connected to things that we feel good about. We feel like are something that we are part of our identity. There's a great saying. I wish I came up with it, but it wasn't me. I don't remember who did, but it's people don't buy brands, they join them. And I think
Mm,
that is incredibly astute, because when you think about it that way, then as a brand, you have to think differently about how you're going to engage with people.
mhm. Right, the strongest brands have, like, cult followings, like Harley Davidson, right? It's
Yeah,
like
no one gets Suzuki tattooed on their ass, right?
right, yeah, and, like, the guy in the Ford pickup like, that has a Harley sticker that says, like, "My other ride's a Harley," like,
Right.
that's not normal with, like, anything else, like,
No, yeah.
"Normally, I'm eating an apple," like, it's like, "What?" Like, why are you advertising this kinda thing?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, there are a handful of brands that do that, that have those kind of followings, and then there are a lot of brands that have subsets of those followings that are more niche brands or whatever. But, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and I think it's something that more and more, particularly as consumers have more power in their hands, like, we have so many choices at our fingertips now. Like, when I was growing up in small town Michigan, like, we had, like, 1 Kmart, I think, or something,
Oh,
that was
good old
it, a
Kmart,
grocery
yep, we had a
store and
Kmart.
whatever. And that those were your options, and now it's like the world is at your fingertips, literally. You can type a few keys and have just about anything delivered to you. And so I think that that puts a lot more onus on brands to understand their customers and what they need and what they want, because the competition is incredibly broad now. And it's your customer who's gonna make that decision. You can sing your own praises all you want, but your customer's gonna be judge and jury in this situation, and if you can't connect with them in some way, if you can't align your brand with their deepest needs, desires, aspirations, etcetera, you're gonna be in for quite a bit of struggle.
Hmm. You said something interesting. You said that basically marketing and sales is just psychology. Can you break that down for me? What do you mean by that? And what does that you fundamentally look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, what people in marketing and sales are trying to do is influence people's minds
Okay.
so that it influences their behavior. And it ultimately is behavior, because, no matter how warm and fuzzy someone feels about our brand, if they're not also making a purchase from our brand, then we haven't finished the job, right? As marketers.
Right.
So ultimately, marketing, sales are about influence. They're about sway. They're about motivation. They're about engagement. Those are all things that psychologists are experts in.
Like the behavior side of psychology, behavior psychology, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think too, you think about perception, you think about those kinds of things that fits as well.
Mm, interesting. Okay. So then, when a big brand approaches you, Um, I see you've worked with, Adidas, North Face, Gillette, Coca-Cola, Arby's, Kroger, Wendy's, a couple of our hometown favorites here.
There you go,
Like,
yeah.
I'm sure they're coming to you for all different things. But
Yeah.
what might like just generally a brand approach you with? These are also huge brands, so this is a bit of a like a I don't want to call it a
Yeah,
luxury buy, right? But like, my little $2,000 a month brand is probably not hiring a psychologist. We're just
right.
making
Yeah,
reasonable inferences like, hey, that marketing looks good.
yeah.
So maybe start with me at the highest level, and then we can go farther down the totem pole to people who have maybe smaller brands, how they can just use like simple
Absolutely.
tactics.
And I have a lot of advice for smaller brands too, because I'm very passionate about that. I literally grew up in a furniture business. My parents opened a furniture store when I was 4 years old. And, so I literally grew up in retail in a mom and pop store, so I have a lot of passion for small brands and, a lot of advice for them that, I think actually small brands have an unfair advantage that they're not aware
I'm
of.
gonna have you hold on to that, and then I'm gonna have
Yeah,
you tell me if you went back in time knowing what you know now, what would you do with your family's furniture business? But we'll save that for a little bit later.
I love it.
Start with me at the top,
Yeah.
what's Coke or North Face or Adidas, like, what are they attempting to get?
So typically, there's some different things. So one may be they have a challenge, um, that is behavioral based or psychology based somehow. So, for example, maybe they had an innovation fall flat and they don't understand why.
Okay.
Or maybe their sales at a particular retailer have tanked and they don't understand why. I love those kind of big, meaty problems where they're like, hey, this is a problem. What do we do?
This is
Um,
Pepsi Clear, right? Why isn't
yeah,
Pepsi Clear selling?
right. There's probably a lot of reasons for
Yeah.
that. Um, but so sometimes it's that, and so I get to do a lot of sleuthing and trying to understand what's going on. So an example um, would be I had a client who was a pharmaceutical company that had this great drug that clinically it was extremely well received, but at the same time, doctors weren't prescribing it, and they couldn't figure out why,
Okay.
what was the gap? And so I helped them understand, like, what was going on with these physicians, and it turns out there were a couple of very important, deep psychological things going on that, um, until they were addressed, were going to be difficult, and one was just a matter of habit. There hadn't been a new drug in this category for literally decades, and
Mm,
so getting into that consideration set of other drugs that have been used over and over and they trust them and they know them was very difficult. So having how do you understand that from a habit standpoint and how habits are created, how they can be dismantled, how you kind of work with them. And then the other was an identity issue, which was this was a highly effective drug that um, didn't require as much expertise, let's say, in figuring out like what's the exact thing going on here. And that's something that these doctors in particular were very proud of as part of their identity.
mm.
And so we had to, figure out how to message and frame around that as well. And so, it is those kind of big meaty questions that I love. And so that's one aspect. Another, is maybe they just want to understand their target customer better. And so I've been a qualitative researcher for 30 years and gotten very good at, kind of being able to get beneath the surface to really see what's going on. And so sometimes it's just, we need a leg up. Yeah, it's a lot of the work I've done with some of the big, big brands is like they're just looking for an advantage somehow, right? And
Mm.
so if I can help them understand their customer better than their competition, then they're going to have an advantage. So that's some of the work I do as well. On top of that, then there's just ongoing consulting that I do regularly with multiple clients, speaking engagements, workshops, in particular consumer psychology topics. So anything from you know influencing behavior, how do you do that in a way that is effective and ethical, to engaging emotion, getting attention, all kinds of different types of workshops and master classes that I lead as well.
Okay. So what would it look like fundamentally with, maybe that pharmaceutical example or, some of those other brands? Are you gathering people together and doing, like, a focus group? Is that mostly how that goes?
Sometimes, yeah. And in this case, I did a lot of one-on-one, had a lot of one-on-one conversations with healthcare professionals, just really trying to understand their thoughts and feelings about this category, this drug, um, their offices, everything, to really, get a good sense of, what is it that's going on for them and why wouldn't they do this? So that, and I also do focus groups, I do discussion groups, all qualitative. Qualitative is really my jam. I don't want to, a lot malign, quantitative is just not my thing.
What are the
Uh,
differences between those 2 things?
yeah, so quantitative is more you think about like a survey, where it's generating data, like number data, right?
So that'd be like surveying, like, 5,000 Coca-Cola, users.
Exactly.
What flavors are you interested in? Lime, lemon, cherry.
Exactly. Now, if you want to know why they prefer one over the other, then you hire me. Because that's ultimately what I do is I get beneath that kind of surface level data to understand, well, why are they making those choices? And getting to the bottom of behavior and what is fueling it.
So something as simple as that. Let's say, again, Coke puts out this survey. Maybe that's a horrible example. You can give me one better, but
Sure.
they give them 8 flavor options, Coke plus, and the fans vote on whatever, lime. You know, what kind of things are you going to do to better understand like that? And why
Yeah.
not just put Coke lime out? It feels like, what I would do, be like, "Hey, they voted for Coke lime. Let's do
Right.
it, baby."
Because what you want, if you want to be able to convince other people, it's great that you got a number of people that like this. If you want to be able to convince other people, if you want to be able to um, sway people from choosing a different flavor or a different brand or a different beverage option, then you need to understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Okay.
Because until you understand that, you're not going to be able to create any kind of lasting change. Because behavior happens for a reason, always. And it may not make sense to us, but it always makes sense to the person doing it somehow. Now,
Okay.
they may not always be fully aware of all the factors that are going on for them, which is why it's hard to ask people directly, like, why do you like lime?
Mhm.
Because what you're going to get is a rationalization. You typically aren't going to get beneath the surface that way. So there's a lot of different ways to go about doing that. And when you understand what it is that is driving the decision making and those behaviors under the surface that's really driving it, then you can say, okay, great. We understand that. I don't know. Flavor is hard to work with because it's so tangible, but
Yeah.
you can say, like, okay, this is what you're trying to achieve. Whether that's achieve an aspiration, meet a goal, avoid a frustration or a challenge, whatever that may be, we can offer you a better way to do that. We can give you a way that is simpler, faster, more enjoyable, more effective, what have you. And that's where real influence comes into play, because now what you're doing is you're acknowledging their underlying needs, behaviors, desires, all those things, and you're offering a way to accomplish that in a way that benefits them because it's better somehow. And that's really the key to influencing without being gross. Is now it goes from being manipulative to actually helping someone get what they want already, just in a better way.
Is this a lot of messaging? That's kind of what I'm hearing, is that it's like
Yeah.
alignment of like the underlying reason or the
Yeah.
underlying thing that someone is seeking. And if you can get down to what they're actually seeking, then
Mhm.
you can align the message to that. But if you don't understand what they're seeking and you just say Coca-Cola, it's delicious, like that may not necessarily be what someone was seeking when they got a
Correct.
Coke.
Yeah, and what I would say is there is a layer, a layer there that didn't mention, which is understanding, what that is underneath, and then comparing that to your brand and saying, what can we credibly offer?
Okay.
Right? Because again, there are going to be things that you just maybe can't credibly align yourself with. But you can identify those things that you can and that are credible to the customer and make sense to them, and now they want it. And so that's really like the key of the thoughtfulness that goes into it.
I'm imagining like when you I don't know if you're a TV watcher, but when you watch TV and you see these commercials, you just kind of see this everywhere.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny. It's commercials, yes. The store, definitely, because I worked in retail consulting for so long that, man, like, going to the store is like completely different for me.
Mm.
I see it everywhere. I see all the different messaging and the different attempts to influence, and sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not so great.
Where are you seeing it in stores? Are you talking on packages or end caps, displays?
Yes. Yep. Anything, end caps, packaging, displays, signage, promotions, different kind of things going on in the store are all very often very strategic.
Mm. So I don't know. Sometimes I look at them and I'm like, what? Who needs a Selena Gomez Oreo? Like, why
Right.
is this a thing? Like,
Yeah.
what's that about celebrity marketing? I mean, that clearly
Yeah.
works. I mean,
Yeah, it
obviously,
does.
it is a huge part of our marketing.
It's really funny because, I mean, you have to think about, like, some of these brands are in categories where the difference between one product and another are very small,
Yeah.
right? And so they need to find anything any leg up they can manage to sway someone to their, their option as a choice. And so that's where you see things like, celebrity endorsements and those types of things where, like sometimes it might seem silly, but sometimes that's the thing that tips the scale. It's a great analogy that someone made once, about marketing that really helped me think about it differently. Because I used to be of the mind of like, oh, I saw that commercial. It's not going to make me buy it,
Mhm.
you know? Um, and someone said to me, that's not how marketing works. Marketing is like feathers on a scale, right? You just another feather on the scale, another feather on the scale, and eventually that scale is going to tip.
Mhm.
That's marketing. So the closest we get to marketing that actually makes people want to buy something is probably retail marketing or even online marketing, where there's much shorter distance between the desire to buy and the opportunity to buy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but generally, you're just watching TV. I mean, that's about another feather on the
Yeah,
scale.
it's impossible basically. We actually ran these ads. They're called Amazon, I think they're Amazon TV ads or something like
Mm,
that. One of our brand partners wanted us to run them, and when you're watching, like, Tubi, I think, they'll flash this ad. So it is cool. You can, like, run an ad on somebody's Roku with, like,
yeah,
like $1,000. But, of course, the conversion was absolutely 0. There's, like, a scan at the end of it, like, "Scan this and buy now." Nobody
yeah.
does that. So, yeah,
There's,
that's the
like we had almost killed off the QR code, and then COVID hit.
yeah, it's back
And now it's
back with a
back, and everyone's
vengeance.
thinking solution again. But you have to remember, like, solutions that work during a crisis aren't necessarily going to work once the crisis has passed. And I think that has been such a huge misunderstanding about behavior during COVID,
Mm,
that, oh, it's like, no one's going to the stores anymore. Well, no one's going to the store because they don't want to get sick. Once the threat of not getting sick isn't there, then unless not going to the store provided some additional value that they really want, they're going to go back to their old behavior, which is exactly what we saw.
mm.
And I think the same can be said, like QR codes, I I don't know if anyone else is, but I get irritated now when I go to a restaurant, especially a restaurant where I have a reservation or something, and I have to like scan the QR code to
Yeah,
get
it's
something.
like, "Come on,
Like,
give me a menu." I know that doesn't
yeah,
cost you very
you know,
much, guys.
right. Especially if they're not offering free Wi-Fi. I'm like, okay, this is just not right.
So, okay, that's at the highest level. They're trying to
Yeah.
just and that is interesting, what you said there, the feathers on the scale, because we 'cause we're in the digital world, so it's like,
Mhm.
we need to convert. We're not trying to do
Yeah.
feathers on the
Oh, sure.
scale, like, if we were feathers on the scale marketers, our clients would just fire us,
Well,
like
yeah, and here's what I would say about that. I mean, but feathers on the scale are still part of the process because they may not buy every time they're exposed to your brand. Now, we'd love that, but you need to make sure that every touch point to the brand is pointing in the right direction so that when that opportunity to buy is there, and and frankly, it is around us more than ever, right? Um, that you're building off of that momentum to make the final push and get them across the line there to buy.
Mhm,
It's very difficult to get someone to buy something after one exposure and having no other exposure to that product.
mhm,
You know what I mean? It's not impossible, but it's much more difficult than if you're thinking about it from the consumer's life and where can we authentically engage with them, and get them thinking about our brand so that when we want to push for that sale, we have momentum.
mhm, and
So there is a feathers on the scale. I get what you're saying, like, because look, I most of the work that I've done has been in, what was called shopper marketing, is now commerce, but it's all like it's behavior, and I will be the first to tell you, like, it's one thing to get people to like your brand, that's great, and it's a huge advantage, but if it's not translating to a purchase behavior, then we haven't finished the job.
mhm.
You know,
So, take me down maybe a step, like, that's some of the things that, the biggest brands are doing, and they're probably thinking about the psychology of the consumer all the way through the whole chain.
you'd be surprised.
Well, maybe
Some are, yeah.
yeah. Well, what do you see when you can instantly go, like, "They're not thinking about this"? What's obvious to you that someone has not kinda thought through the process?
There's a few things that I think are, kinda take me in that direction. One is if, if I'm talking to a brand or a brand manager, if you will, and they're like, it's a commodity category, people don't really have emotional connections.
What would be an example?
So, it's a great example is, years ago, I worked, on a, large brand that had, dish soap, um, and I remember the conversation with the brand manager, as we were getting started, he's like, This is a drive-by category, nobody really cares, they just buy what they bought last time, or they buy what's cheapest and move along, they barely stop their carts." And I remember saying, because I believe that every purchase we make is based on an emotional need or an emotional motivation. And so we were having that conversation, which you can imagine is kind of fun. And I just said, I want to have this conversation again after we do, and we were doing some research with customers. And what we found in this category was really, it sounds maybe not as impressive as it was in the moment because it was a big aha moment, but we found some very strong emotional needs here in this category, and
Mm,
it was essentially that, their target were busy, typically, like, busy heads of household with kids,
mhm,
right? And, they got a lot going on in their lives, and in addition to having to clean up. And what it came down to was the need was certainty. Like, I need to know this is going to work the first time because I am crazy busy.
mm,
I've got kids, I've got a house to run. And if I have to rewash the dishes because it didn't go through the dishwasher right the first time or whatever, then that throws off everything. Like, we have a carefully orchestrated way that things go here. And if that goes off, then everything else is going to get screwed up too. And so it really became about the reason why people were only buying, the same thing they bought last time or buying what's cheap is because they needed to know it was going to work at least as well as what they already
I
have.
see. They
Right. And
couldn't downgrade.
right. And so even though, like, oh, this new dish soap is way better than the old one. Well, I don't I'm not here to experiment, right?
Mm,
Like, you say that, sure, but I don't know that. I know this works well enough to
mm,
keep my household running. I'm not going to take that risk and do that. I need the certain. So what that did with the strategy is it took it from just framing and, talking about, how it was better to providing proof points, so showing how it works, showing the results, having demonstrations, those kinds of things to actually prove that this was better. That made a huge difference for this brand.
yeah,
Yeah.
an entrepreneur I really like, Alex Hormozy, he says,
Yeah, I love
you can get up and you can just present a 60-minute slideshow of just testimonials and then not say a single word, and at the end, people will buy. Because it's
yeah.
like you've just provided so much proof,
Yep.
and what he says is proof that someone in a very similar situation as you has gotten results, and I love that. I think that makes so much sense.
Absolutely. 100%, and that's, we psychologists refer to that as social proof, and that's, when and it and you said the right thing, which is people like me, right? It's one thing to have like someone that you can't relate to be like, yeah, this is great. Like you see like skin cream commercials with with people who look like they're about 19 years old. Like, I don't
Yeah,
have any wrinkles. Like,
right.
okay, come on, right?
Yeah.
It's, when you show someone who looks like me showing improvement, that's different, right? And so I think that, there's a lot that goes on that we don't necessarily think of as psychology because it's so everyday to
Mhm.
us that when you do actually take the time to take a step back and look at it more deeply, you start to realize, yeah, there's a lot more going on here. And that's what I love about what I do. Like being able to take that dish soap example and show like there's a lot more going on underneath the surface here that is really important to this person. Now, we may not see it, we may not understand it. It's important to them, it's important to their household. And if you want to matter to them, you have to show them why they should care.
Okay, so take me through maybe like an experiment then. Your framework or your fundamental belief that there's always some sort of a deeper
Yeah.
kind of emotional connection to a brand. Like maybe how would I start to think about that, with my company or with anybody's company? Maybe give us kind of an example and talk me through how someone would think about that.
Well, I'm gonna start with I feel like the brand's a little too easy, but I'll get to that. I'm gonna say any product we buy,
Okay.
has an emotional association or emotional need. So you can say, and where people usually go is like go to mundane things like, what do you mean? Like buying
Yeah,
underwear?
my Sharpie markers, that has an
Yeah.
emotional need?
Like, and so one you could go to is like, oh, toilet paper. Eh. Well, that's been proven wrong for all of eternity because of COVID. What was the
Oh,
first thing
yeah.
that people stocked up on that you couldn't get anymore because it was gone off the shelves was toilet paper. Now, on what planet does that make sense? Well, on Psychology Planet, apparently. You think about what was going on at the time, and if you put yourself back in those days, those dark days of early COVID when we didn't know what was going on, we didn't know how long we are gonna be in lockdown, we didn't know how serious this was gonna get. People felt deeply, deeply insecure.
Yeah, fearful.
And yeah, exactly, and they needed something, anything that felt tangible, that felt like I'm prepared, I have something that will help me care for myself and my family, and in this case, it was toilet paper. Like, toilet paper somehow represented comfort, certainties, the stock up on things that we need,
Mm,
and it flew off the shelves like crazy. And, so I think that that is an example of where that psychology rushes to the surface and becomes very obvious,
mm,
where usually, it's not that clear or that obvious.
mhm,
But that's an example where it really came screaming to the forefront.
mm. Same thing is true with hand sanitizer, right? People just took
Yeah,
that as a proxy for safety. Like, if I have hand sanitizer, I'll be safe, and,
I'll be good, right?
obviously, now looking back, doesn't really seem like anything you did was gonna,
Well,
not
there's a lot
advocate
of
for
things that we did then that, I remember coming home and wiping down my
That's
groceries and
right, yep,
all
there
that
was a
stuff, right?
period where people would leave the groceries, everyone would wipe it down. Um,
But there's always something. There always, and now sometimes it's easier to find and sometimes it's harder to find, and then, that's just, some things seem naturally and obviously emotional, I mean, think about, clothing or, big ticket items, automobiles, you can see where there's emotional connection there around the idea of identity or,
yep, yep.
those kinds of things. But when you start to get into the more mundane things like, toilet paper or yeah, your choice of markers or your, whatever it is, there's always something there. There's always an emotional nugget there. Now the question is, can we find it? And then once we find it, what can we do with it? And that's where the real challenge comes in.
So, because we work in a lot of, consumer packaged goods, how do you think about kind of those items? It sounds like you've done a ton of work in that
Ton
too.
of work. Yeah. I mean, I always joke. I worked in every category from dish soap to diamonds, and you think about one. So at a product level. Products, we don't buy things just for the sake of having stuff. We buy them because they do something for us. And there's a functional side of that and there's an emotional side of that. And
Mhm.
sometimes they're very intertwined, sometimes they're different. You think about, laundry detergent. Why does someone choose one over another? There's a zillion reasons why. Particularly in a category like that, where the differences between one and the other functionally, who knows? I don't know, but certainly emotionally, some brands benefit from nostalgia. That's what my parents use,
Mhm.
so therefore I'm connected to it somehow. And that makes me feel connected to my family or makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing because if it was good enough for mom, it's good enough for me. There's things like that when you dig deep enough and you find those little nuggets, can make a huge difference if you employ it the right way.
Mm. So, if you're dealing with, like, a food item,
Mhm.
what kinda be your strategy to tie that emotional sense? Or food, sports nutrition, health, wellness, something like that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, food plays a lot of different roles in our lives. So, depending on what that is, food can represent certainty, being stocked up, you having your pantry stocked up, that can be something that is like be prepared, your family's ready, you got everything you need to be successful, etc. It could be around connection. Certainly food represents connection to us. We have dinners with friends, we have, family dinners. We are always connecting around food. And so, there's another avenue. It could be around playfulness, the need for play and how food can play that role, experimenting with different things, different recipes, different flavors, etc. There's a zillion different directions you could go. Now, how I would determine that is who's my client? what kind of food categories are they working in? What are their objectives and who are they targeting? And that would be where I would start because, food can be all of those things, but it's probably not going to be all those things for this particular situation, right? So we have to think about that from a context perspective as well. And then, that's where you start like connecting dots.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess I see a lot of brands that don't they probably don't have any of those things that they're, like, trying to hit on. It's just like, "Our
Mhm.
product's good." Like,
Yeah.
packaging looks cool, like, it's a good product for the
Yeah.
category. Like, I've got, hydration powder packets in front of me, and, like, I do like their product. Pricing is reasonable, but I guess I'm kind of taking a step back and thinking about a lot of my clients, and very few of them, I think, are hitting any sort of deeper psychological need
Yeah.
for people.
Here's what I would say is they probably are, they just don't know it.
Okay.
And that's the that's the sad part of it. I always say, when it comes to emotional engagement with your customer, you're engaging emotionally whether you're aware of it or not. Um, and it's you can hit on something without trying, without realizing it, and that's, very fortuitous. But I work with my clients and say, look, your customers are going to have an emotional response to your product, your marketing, your what you deliver, all of those things. It's just a matter of how strategic you're going to be about it. Because when you are aware and strategic about it, now you know how to leverage it. You know how to keep it going. You know how not to jeopardize it. You know, like what your parameters are with your customers, which you can operate and still keep that emotional connection without losing it or without, kind of betraying it.
Mhm. I feel like, we're still a little bit high level. I'm thinking this is still
Okay. Yeah,
big brand strategy. Like, take me maybe down, like, I just started a brand. I can't get a focus group, Like, how would
sure.
you think about, coaching someone like that up? And kinda what I'm hearing is, maybe if you can find just, like, 1 or 2 or 3 emotional sorta tie-ins, those are important things to make part of your marketing strategy, but you tell me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I think you're going to have emotional tie-ins whether you know it or not. So it's more of an active discovery than creation.
Mhm.
Um, I would say so anyone starting a company or anyone with a small company, my first bit of advice to them. So it's kind of two pronged. So the first is be very deliberate about who you're going to target and understand them as best you can.
'Kay.
So, trying to be all things to all people these days is just not how marketing and how the market works anymore.
Mhm.
You know, even in retail, it used to be, you know, stack it high and watch it fly. Well, that doesn't go over anymore. You have to have a target. You have to have a niche. You have to have some angle that gets people to want to visit you online or in store or what have you. Um,
You gotta have a niche before you go mainstream. Like, you're not
yeah, it's
gonna start mainstream and work backwards.
Yeah, it's like, you have a GPS system, you're gonna put a destination in. If you don't, you're just gonna be driving around, right?
Mhm.
So, this is kind of like that. It's like, what is your goal? Who is it that you want to buy your product or you think would be the best prospect to buy your product? And what do you know about them? And when it comes to small businesses, and again I mentioned earlier, like small businesses have an advantage that big businesses don't, and that is that the principals of the company are usually engaging with customers on a day-to-day basis,
Mhm.
and that's a huge advantage. I know for a lot of people it's maybe a pain, but you're on the front lines with your staff or at least you're very close to the front lines, where you are getting immediate feedback. You're able to make observations. You're getting to know those customers at an experiential level that the big, huge companies, their principals are in offices who don't shop like, don't make decisions like they're your target customer. They're not, you're so far removed that you need somebody like me, right? To help bridge that gap.
That's the old Bill Gates on Ellen when they're asking him, like, grocery prices. Have you seen
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
It's like a box of rice. He's like, $20, and everyone in the audience is like, "Oh," and he's like, "What?
Yeah.
Is that bad?"
It's like, did you ever watch Arrested
Oh,
Development?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's when, I can't think of the mom's name right now, but when she's like, "It's 1 banana, what can it possibly cost? $10?"
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
like
Yep. Oh, that's funny.
but I think there is and so what I think though is a lot of smaller companies don't realize they have that advantage, and they don't take full advantage of it by being intentional about, um, documenting or calling out what they've learned, you know? And so that's the first place is like be deliberate. Take some time with yourself, your staff, whoever are on the front lines. Take an hour, take a couple hours, whatever, and just brainstorm together and share information about what you've observed about your customers, and think about like what is it they come in for? What is it that they're buying? How do they make decisions? When do they turn around and walk out? Like there's so much that you can draw from those observations that you wouldn't need somebody like me. Now I can help,
Mhm.
but but I do think that um, most small businesses have more knowledge than they realize.
Yeah, that's, do you know, the Ask method, Ryan Levesque?
I don't think so.
Yeah, he gets brought up kind of often on this podcast, actually. You should, check him out. You'd probably like
Yeah,
this, but
yeah.
basically, he wrote a book, and it's, like, not long. It's, like, 100 pages maybe, but it's one of those books where, like, you read the first chapter, you're like, "Okay, yeah, I get it," and then the remainder of the book is, like, just explaining everything that he said
Right.
in the first
Yeah.
chapter. But basically, he's built, like, some really impressive businesses,
Interesting.
and all he does is, like, I'll get into a niche, and then I'll just, like, hammer my customers with, like, surveys and try to really, really understand. And he's
Hmm.
built some really cool businesses off of that. And then he
Interesting.
just sort of found out, like, "Oh, the business is what I'm doing, this, like, survey process."
Right. Right.
So yeah, it's called the Ask Method. He's written a book, and
Okay.
I got recommended
Very
it by
cool.
someone I really like, and then somebody said it, like, within the last 2 podcasts.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
I'll check it
It's
out.
kinda like small scale. I mean, yeah, the TLDR is, like, you need to talk to your customers and find out what they
Right.
actually
Right. Right.
want.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It is amazing to me the extent that sometimes people go to not talk to their customers.
well, I think some people
I
feel a
think,
little awkward, like, asking their customer for information, like, "What do you
yeah.
think about this product?" But I think, it really probably just builds, like, trust and relationship
Yeah.
between you and your customer.
Yeah.
It's like being one of the first fans of a band, you know,
Yeah.
when, "Oh, dude, I was, like, the 100th person who downloaded your album back in 2017. Now you're, like, a global superstar." It's like, "Oh, it's cool
Right.
because I was there."
Yes. Well, and it's also, I mean, a couple things. So one, just because it feels awkward to us doesn't mean it feels awkward to them.
Mhm,
So, I always call like main character syndrome, like when we assume that our customers think like we do.
mhm.
That's you have to kind of set aside your own perspectives because typically we're not exactly like our target customer. So, that's one is like realizing like, oh, it's not about my perspective. It's about theirs. And in fact, my perspective can get in the way of seeing clearly, right? Having worked with so many big brands that are so rah, rah, rah about their brands, I can tell you that's half the battle is getting them to like, okay, take off the rah, rah hat for a second so that you can see this without that lens on. Um, and then the other piece I think is that, generally, if assuming you approach it, in a way that is polite and, diplomatic and you're not being aggressive or, obnoxious, most people want to be, they want to be heard. I think that's, been half of the success that I've had is like people want to be heard. They want to be acknowledged. They want to feel like their perspective matters. And that's one of the reasons why I love being a qualitative researcher is because I get to be the dumbest guy in the room and I get to ask stupid questions and people will go out of their way to explain things to me because they feel heard, they feel acknowledged and they want someone to understand them even over the most like mundane things. It is something that I think is a basic human need to be, heard, acknowledged, validated, and one that I think is becoming rarer and rarer as we kind of all fade back into our technologically driven bubbles, you know? Um, and so I think that, uh, you'd be surprised, like, if you approach it correctly and just ask people like, "Hey, can you explain this to me?" I one time in my early days, okay, this is hilarious. I led a series of focus groups. Um, I still can't believe they let me do this. On the focus was on women's health, with all the things that entail women's health that you can imagine. And I just played the dumb guy. And it was amazing. I mean, if I'm like, I'm not really getting it. I'm a guy. Can you explain this to me? I don't get it. Like, amazing how much they were like, to the point where, like, I remember one time, one of the participants in a group I was leading, she kinda looks at me, she's like, are you okay with this conversation?" Because it's getting so personal, and I was like, "I've heard it all. I don't," it doesn't bother me at all. Um, but, I think, like, I've made a great career out of being the dumbest guy in the room, and, when you play it right, people just want to explain it to you.
I mean, that's Sarah Blakely with Spanx, like 101. She was, like,
100%,
talking to these
right?
manufacturers, and they're like, "We've never manufactured it like that." She's like, "This is uncomfortable. Like, have you guys ever worn this?" Like, "Of course we've never
Right.
worn this product." Like, "Okay." Well, it's funny you talk about, like, misunderstanding that you and your customer think about things differently. My friend, he's a triathlete coach,
Mm,
and he was like, "Dude, I'm thinking about giving this business up." And I'm like, "Okay, let's talk about it."
yeah.
And, like, we get into his pricing, and he was charging, like, $250 a month for, like, full service coaching. And
Oh,
I
wow.
was like, "Ryan, you need to 10x your price." He's like,
Mhm.
"What?" And I'm like, "You need to 10x your price, dude." And he's like, I can't imagine ever paying that." I'm like, "You wouldn't ever pay that, Ryan.
Right.
Like, you're like a
Exactly.
semi-pro triathlete. You're not going to first and foremost, you don't have any money. Like, you're a triathlete and a triathlete coach."
Right, right.
I'm like, "Your ideal customer is like a 62-year-old executive. Like, that's who
Yeah,
you're seeking. Like, not you. Like, you need to get off the 'I would never pay for
yeah,
this' idea."
yeah. I mean, and it's such a great observation. And I think if we think about things that way, like, if we can stop ourselves and say, "But wait, I'm not the target. Okay, let me set that aside for a second and learn about them, and what they want, what they aspire to, what they're trying to solve." Um, it is one of the most important things you can do to be a successful person in sales and marketing.
That's tough because sometimes you do create a product and you go, "This is the product that I wanted to," "I wish was in the
Sure.
market," right? So sometimes you are, but maybe not necessarily.
Yeah, and even in those cases, you'd be limiting yourself to only target someone just like yourself, So it's like, who else might this appeal to? I mean, it's kind of a little bit of back, like, flip around thinking, but in that scenario where, if you created something that you're very passionate about, you feel strongly about, unless, like, there's a huge niche for with that, exact target, you need to start thinking about, okay, well, what else can, who else can this appeal to? How so? What do they care? Why would they care? Those kinds of things.
Okay, so we've talked to our customers. We've kind of tried to understand what they think about it. We identified, our ideal customer, or we hope we've identified our ideal customer. Then where are we going to go with that information?
Yeah. So yeah, it is. I mean, step one, know who you're targeting. Step two, build empathy for that person, and that is bigger than insight.
Okay.
Insight is important, but I think empathy is the key. Insight is looking from the outside in to understand someone. Empathy is trying to understand from the inside out. What do they care about? Why, what is it that, again, the things that we've talked about, right? So from that point, once you've kind of established that, then the question becomes, what is the behavior that you want to change? Right. So being very clear. And so this is a step. So each of these steps, like, is foundational to the next step. So, like, you've seen Maslow's hierarchy. It's kind of like that, where each step is dependent on the step below it to get it right. So you don't know who you're targeting. It becomes difficult to build empathy for that person. You don't have empathy, then it's going to be hard to figure out, you know, what is it that we want them to do and why would they do this? And so each one kind of builds on the other. So the step after, like you building that empathy, you understand them well. What is it I want them to do? What exactly? And so this is a place where so often like a customer's like, I want them to buy my product. Okay, well, that's a starting point. Let's get more specific. Do you want them, how are you going to source the volume for this, right? So, where are these customers going to come from? Are they going to be first time buyers? So, trial would be important. Are they going to be trading up from an inferior product? So, that, proof points and all those things. Are they trading over from a competitor?
Mm,
Do you want them to buy your product more frequently? Do you want them to spend more on it when they spend? What are those things that you specifically want? Because each of those is a different strategic
that's
pathway.
interesting.
Yeah, and so, like, that's a conversation that is so important because otherwise it's just like spray the wall and see what works. Versus, hey, I'm introducing a premium product into this category. I want people to trade up from their current product. Okay, excellent. Now there's a whole series of strategies that we can develop to do that,
Mm,
versus buy my product.
interesting. And if they're trade up would be ostensibly different from start using a product that I'm not using at all, which
Yeah,
would be
exactly.
different
Because then you've got
from,
that's trial, right?
competitor to
You
move
want
over.
to try it, and enjoy it, and do that. So there's a whole series of strategies that go with trial.
Mm,
There's a whole series of strategies that go with stealing share from my, competitor. There's a whole series of strategies that go to trade up. So those are all really important to understand. And then in this, after this conversation, I've had clients say, well, I want to do everything. I'm like, okay, that's great. Well, unless you have an unlimited budget, we should probably talk about priorities here, right? What's going to be the most sustainable for you? What's going to be the most profitable for you? Those kinds of questions. And it's sometimes it's harder than others, but usually I can get them to at least a set of priorities around the behavior.
that is really interesting that you say, like, if someone is not currently using this product, they have to trial it, like, and then
Yeah,
they probably have to feel the benefits, see the benefits, understand the benefits. Whereas
yeah,
if you're switching
experience
from a
the benefit.
competitor, it's like, I kind of already, like, believe in this solution. I just
I
built.
just need to know that it's better.
Yeah.
That somehow this is better. So in that better isn't necessarily functional. It might be an emotional thing. It might be I feel better buying this product. I feel more confident, or I feel, whatever it is. I think it's always important to remember that the benefits that we get from the products we use is not simply functional. There are tons of emotional aspects of it. So again, if I want to steal share from my competitor, look, I've worked in so many categories where the difference between brands is so minute that it does come down to a celebrity endorsement or an emotional appeal, or we have a partnership with a charity, and that makes the difference. And so it is really important to consider what is it that we want them to do specifically,
Mm,
because the next step is motivation. Why would they want to do this?
'kay.
And it is a very important step to understand. And again, not why do I want them to do this? Why would they want to engage in this behavior that we've defined, right? Um, and understanding it from their perspective, and so the questions around that become like, why is this meaningful to them? Why does it matter to them? Why would they care? What benefit are they going to get from it? What do they anticipate they'll get from it? How is this going to help them achieve their aspirations? Those kinds of questions that will help you get to what is the pull for this brand, like what or this product or brand or service, whatever it is. What for this particular target? What is the pull for them? What could it be? Um, and the better you can see that from their perspective. So this is where all that empathy building you did is going to come in really helpful. Is why would they want to do this? And if you can't answer that succinctly, then you got some work to do.
Interesting. Mm,
And the flip side of this, so this is still the same test, same step, but a different the flip side of that step. So I have motivation. The other flip side is means, and means is all about how are they going to get
Okay.
this, right? So it's how do we make it faster, easier, simpler, more enjoyable for them to achieve this? Asking questions like, why wouldn't they do this, right? So let's say we've got the motivation now, but why wouldn't they do it? What would get in the way of them taking these behaviors that we want? And so that's where you get into barriers to purchase. You get into, things like there's too many steps involved, or it takes too much effort, or it's too expensive. What is it that is stopping them right now? Because then that's going to tell you what we need to overcome.
Yeah, we call that
Right?
frictionless.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
just
Yep.
try to
It's
tell
a
people
different
like,
way.
"Dude, there's too much friction in, like, acquiring your product." And I
The
think as
only thing,
consumers, we all know how finicky we are. Like, "Oh, I gotta put in my shipping information, close."
yeah. Here's the thing, though. So one, I think friction, and I like thinking about it that way. The only thing I would caution on that is just not limiting it to um limiting it to like physical things or steps or things. Sometimes those are, but sometimes it could just be like, I don't feel good buying this,
Mm,
like it just doesn't resonate with me or whatever. And you're getting a little bit into the motivation, but that's why these are flips of the same. Um, and the other thing is that they have to go together. If you motivate someone to buy something, get excited about it, and they want to buy it, and it's way too difficult, they're just gonna be frustrated and pissed off.
okay, yep.
If you make it as frictionless as possible, but they have no motivation, they don't care about it,
Mhm.
they're not gonna do anything. You gotta have motivation and means together, for it to work. Now, here's the thing, though. One of those things can outshine the other, and I'll give you an example. You can motivate the hell out of somebody, and they will jump through hoops to get it if you do it right. So a great example I love is, have you ever been to, like, a TJ Maxx or a
Yeah,
Marshalls?
yeah.
Like, it's a mess in there, right?
Yeah, there's no
Right?
organization
Yeah,
whatsoever.
no, it's crazy. If you go in there like, "Oh, I'm just gonna take 10 minutes to grab something," you're in trouble, but they have positioned themselves as a treasure hunt,
Hmm,
right? And so they have used that positioning as a way of motivating people who are, obviously of the right target, that you could possibly find something amazing here, right?
mm,
And so therefore, they're willing to like that the store being a mess is actually part of the appeal,
interesting.
you know? And so, again, it's just a matter of strategy, positioning, understanding your customer that you can do things like that. But here's the problem. Too many people without all that information try to do stuff like that, and then it falls flat.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna give me, getting a new government ID. It's like high motivation, extreme amounts of friction.
Right? Yeah, especially like high amounts of anticipated friction. Like if I go to get my real ID and it's actually like takes me 10 minutes, I'm gonna be blown
Yeah,
away.
right, right. No. Um, okay, well then I really like those things. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
you hit on something really, really important is like, where does that customer come from? That's one that I haven't really thought about. Like, do they trade up? Do they trade down? Do they go across? Or do they start a new habit?
Those are gonna determine your strategy, like if you have, assuming you don't have an unlimited budget to like throw every strategy at the wall, then this is gonna give you the direction of like which strategy should we
Are
prioritize.
those the 3 or 4 different categories? They're starting a new thing, they're trading up, they're trading down maybe to a
Yeah, there's
cheaper,
a
or
few of
they're
them.
going across from a competitor?
Yeah, I think those like so new to the category. Current buyer that you want to trade up, current buyer you want to trade over to your brand from a competitor. There are others. So like you can also get into like, okay, they already buy our products. Okay, so we want them to buy more frequently, or we want them to spend more. Maybe you have a regimen
Yep,
strategy
yep.
where it's like you want them to buy the plus one, And so, those there's a number of different questions and things you can go through to kind of nail down like what are our priorities from a strategy standpoint.
Okay, that's super helpful.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked to our customers, we understand who they are, we've thought through where we're trying to get them from. We
Yep.
we kind of understand those. Now, what does this look like fundamentally putting it all together? Like as I assemble the
Yeah.
puzzle, like
Yep.
what are my ads? Are they just, grandmas, walking their great granddaughters and getting them ice cream? Is it all like tear
Well, you're
jerkers?
leading
Like,
us to the right thing because then, like, the next step I would say is understanding when are they gonna be receptive to our message, right? So this gets into, like, journey work and stuff like that, but, like, not just for the sake of doing it, it's to understand, like, what is going on in the context of their lives that we can credibly authentically tap into where they'll be open to our message, right? And because we've contextually like personalized it in a way or made the message contextually relevant, they're going to be more open to us. So that's why you want to understand kind of the journey and, different parts of their life and what's going on so that we can kind of make sure our message is going to get through as clearly as possible. So that's sort of the where, when part of the equation. And then you'd build your strategy from
Yeah,
there.
so give me the what. Like, let's say I think that whatever, it's gonna be I mean, it's pretty much for everybody. It's Facebook. It's Instagram ads.
Yeah.
Sure, there's some billboard and TV, but we're talking way out there. Um,
Yeah, but the fact that that is everybody, now you have to discern yourself
true,
somehow,
true.
right? You know what I mean? And so that's where this kind of stuff really comes in. And it's so funny because I hear people, and I hear the work that I did early on in my career was very physical retail,
Yeah.
right? And as we transition more and more into online mobile shopping, I had so many people tell me like, "Oh, well, you're just talking about physical retail." I'm like, "No, I'm not." Like the principles are very similar. They're the same. It's the way we go about it that's different. It's the underlying principles versus the how. The principles are the same as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there may be some additional things that come to mind when we think about online or virtual or I'm sorry, mobile, but the principles, the emotional engagement, what people want when they are shopping, that what they're getting from a purchase, those principles are very similar. It's the how that is different. I'll give you an example. I mean, I'm a big music junkie. I have been my whole life. I used to spend hours and hours at the record store just discovering new music and all this stuff. And, unfortunately, I don't get to do that very often anymore. I still love it when I do, but I still listen to a ton of music. I still do a whole bunch of exploration, but you know what? I'm doing it on Spotify.
Mhm.
The what is the same. It's the emotional stuff that I get from it. Identity, right? What you listen to says something about the kind of person you are. Exploration, the ability to like find new things, the treasure hunt, finding new bands that are no one's heard of. Those are all the same. I'm just the how is different. So if I wanted to connect with someone like online around music, those principles of identity, treasure hunt, exploration are the same, but the how we get them to do it, the how we connect with them is going to be different.
Mm. So what do you think about crafting like that ad? Because eventually, like, you have all this, and then some, like, copywriter or photographer or graphic designer goes, "All right, Chris, what do we say? Like, what's the picture of? What's the video of? What do we say?" Right?
Yeah,
This is where, Mad Men came in, right? Y
absolutely. And it's the challenge I'm gonna have here is that it's so contextual,
Yeah.
right? So, um, one, I'm not typically in the lead anymore at this point. I am now in a support role. And hopefully, and I've worked with tons of creatives and tons of copywriters that I have great relationships with, and they want to, constantly like have that engagement and bounce things around with me, and that's awesome. I love it. Sometimes they just take it and run with it, and they don't want anymore. And that, I who am I? Like it's up to them at that point. I'll do my best to help, and I'm always willing to help guide or provide feedback or whatever. But I'm not usually in the lead at that point.
Mhm. How often do you see the ad that they come up with and you go like, "Did you even pay attention to, like, the work that I did?" Like, you just made something sexy,
Oh, I
like, and
know.
sure, it's sexy, but
Right, right. It fortunately, like, the clients that that consult with now are mostly clients I've had for a long time,
so
and
they get it.
so
They sorta get it.
they generally but, there's always these moments of like, "Huh, can you explain that one to me?" Um, and that's fine, it's part of the process, like, I'm not self-involved enough to think that just because I say it, someone's gonna run off and do it. Like, I'm gonna provide my insight and perspective, and they're gonna take and do what they want with it. Now, I'm happy to help continue that process with them, but, I think there's a certain amount of humility that you have to have in this role,
Mhm.
Um, so, if I'm asked for feedback or, that's part of the, anticipation that I will provide feedback, absolutely. But if they're like, "No, we're gonna just take it and run," what am I gonna do with that,
Mhm.
you know?
So I'm not I'm not a ad designer guy. You're not an ad designer guy, but certainly you've seen them and you've kind of thought through
Oh,
this
yeah.
process. Like for somebody out there, they got that small brand. Like, what are the things that you're thinking of? Like, clearly that emotional attachment, getting down to
Yeah.
that deeper level. Like, as people are crafting those ads, because what I see both in ads and content, which are basically one and the same, right? You're not putting out content just to put out content. It's all an ad.
Right. Yeah.
Um, I see people just like you know, taking a picture of their product, sitting out on a turf and just saying something like "fun in the sun today." Grab this
Right.
product, like that's where I feel like a lot of people they don't even know what to do, so they're just like, "I
Right.
got to do something. I'm putting content out there." Maybe like give us a better way of thinking about this.
Yeah. There's 2 things I would say. One is the first question you should ask yourself, um, to assess, just a broad question, is why is this meaningful to my target customer? Why would they care about this?
Mhm.
Like, why would this be motivating to them somehow? Why would they want to pay attention to this?
Okay.
Right? I mean, if you can't answer that, I mean, and from the perspective of your customer, that's a challenge. That's put that little red flag out because that's challenging. Another question I always ask is what can you do that would cause your customer to be willing to pay twice as much for this from their perspective? Like what is it from their perspective? And it's just a good mental exercise to have
Maybe talk
because
talk me
it
through
gets you
that.
to.
Walk me through what that might look like.
So, think about I don't know, we're selling dish soap. Let's go back to our dish soap. All right, we're going to introduce a new product. Okay, let's just ask the question: what would you have to do to make this product worth being twice as expensive as every other product on the shelf for your customer? Well, that starts to get you, if you approach it correctly, what it gets you to is like, what do they really value about this category?
Yeah.
What do they really want from it? What does it provide to them? And not just functionally. Yeah, it's going to clean dishes great, but what does that do for them? Like, what does that enable for them? What does it empower them in their lives? Those kinds of questions, because then that's going to tell you what you can focus on that is going to be meaningful to them. It doesn't mean that you're going to charge twice as much. It's just a mental exercise so that you can kind of help get to those questions and those answers around what do they truly value about this category, this product, this brand.
Yeah, the thing that I first thought of is like, I know we're talking about dish soap, but I was thinking about washing my hands with it, more like Dawn style. And I was
Sure.
thinking of health, like what are the fragrances? What are the dyes? Why is this better for me? Is this worse for me? I know
There you
that's a
go.
huge area. So maybe part of how much of this is like product, like not to say reworking, but how much of this is like, do you get feedback that are like, hey, your product doesn't really align with what people want?
Yeah, I think it happens a lot. It happens a lot. And it's sometimes it's just it doesn't fulfill enough of what they want. Sometimes it's too difficult to get what they want out of it. There's different things, but like it is here's the thing. At the end of the day, if your target customer is not happy with the product, you're in trouble.
Mm,
It's that simple. So no matter how hard you sell it, no matter how much you like try to do these things, if it's not living up to it, then you've got problems. So that has to be there. Um, and here's the thing. So anytime that I introduce myself to someone and I tell them what I do, like 8 times out of 10, the first question I get is, "Oh, so you trick people into buying stuff they don't want."
mhm. Yep.
And I used to hate that, but now I love it because it's just it is fun to answer and it's fun to talk about like what I do and what I don't do. Um, You can do that. You can trick people into buying stuff. We as marketers, we are smart enough, we're sophisticated enough, we've got the tools. We can get anyone to buy anything once.
Yeah, and those classic
You know?
stories are there about the tobacco companies, like, back
Yeah.
in the '50s and '60s, and
Yeah.
it's like, they knew this was pretty bad for you.
It opens up your breathing
Yeah,
passages, like,
right,
"Okay,
right. 9 out
alright,
of 10
okay."
doctors smoke
Alright.
Camel. It's like, "Okay,
You're
well,
right.
whatever."
Um, but, there's a zillion examples of it out there. Like, a recent example that just makes me insane is, overusing scarcity. Every time I'm gonna go book a room, it's the last room left,
Yeah.
really? Like, every time? Come on. Now, there's a way to use scarcity that is actually adds value, and there's a way to use it as a trick, you know? If you are if you own a shop, whether that's in store or online, whatever, and you've got a hot product that people want and you have a limited supply, by all means, let your best customers know. But if every time I go to book a room, it's the last room available, that starts to erode the trust that you've built. And I think that you can trick people into buying stuff. You absolutely can. Here's the problem. Think about your own experience. If anytime, like, we've all been in the scenario where we've been coerced into buying something, whether it's pushy salesperson or promises made that, like, you think about, like, um, oh, I can't think of the name of it. What's the, like, discount Amazon store?
Oh,
The
Temu? Temu,
Temu. Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, like, it is like it is legendary, like, the stories out of Temu. Like, people like, "This is what I bought, this is what I
Yeah,
got?"
right.
So think about how you feel in those situations. Like, you don't feel good about the product, you don't feel good about the brand, you don't feel good about yourself. Like, it's frustrating, it creates resentment. And if that continues, what it leads to is avoidance. And if that's how your target customer is responding to your brand, that's a
Mhm.
problem. That's a real problem. And so, I always say, like, yeah, you can trick people into buying stuff. Yeah, totally. I don't recommend it because it is way more uh, difficult and way more expensive to acquire new customers because you ran all the other ones off than it is to build relationships with your customers based on trust, based on them wanting to be part of your brand and wanting your brand to be part of their lives. And the sense of, like, mutual understanding. Like, I feel like I understand the brand and I feel like they actually want to understand me. Things like that. That's how you create a loyal customer that is not only you know, willing to buy from you, they're also forgiving. And I think that's an important aspect that brands don't think about when it comes to, like, building relationships with your customers. Is when you have that kind of relationship, you're much more forgiving. Like, I buy Apple. That's I every piece of electronic I have that's worth anything is an Apple product. And if Apple came out with a weird pricing strategy or a new innovation that didn't work out, whatever, I'm not immediately going to go run and buy a PC. I trust them enough. Have a relationship with them. I trust that either they're going to make it right, they're going to get it right the next time, or this is just a blip, and it's just it's not anything in the overall relationship that I have with them. Versus if you're just connecting with people functionally, if you're tricking them, you're not building that trust. And as soon as something better comes along or something not as clunky or what have you, you're dust. And I think that the value that you can build by building those kind of trusting relationships is really important.
Are there a handful of, like, quick things you can run off that, are, like, classic, like, not tricks, but, like,
Oh yeah,
things that people could
100%.
probably have seen, but also when they see them, they should go, "Hold on a minute."
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like, for most of these are, they're psychological principles or heuristics or biases, what have you, that can be used positively or they can be used negatively. So, like, scarcity being one of them, right? And I just gave you the example of that. Other ones are like, like, center stage effect, where it's like we tend to pick the one in the middle, right?
Mm,
So if you offer someone three options, good, better, best, and it's three different price points, we are just wired for some reason to pick the one in
that's
the middle,
funny.
right? So now you can use that as a marketer in a good way. You can. really showcase like what are the pros and cons of each and what do you get with each, or you can, you can like have a decoy that is a product that's not much better, that is much more expensive because you want them to pick the lower one. Like it's when we start getting manipulative like that. And the thing is like sometimes it
Mhm.
works. And that's actually the danger of it, because it works until it doesn't, and then you got a whole bunch of pissed off
Yeah,
customers.
anchoring too, you anchor the customer. The
Yeah,
price is
exactly. All
$5,000.
this.
Like, I see this all the time, which I'm not saying it's wrong because I understand that it does work. You anchor
Yeah,
the customer, it's $5,000, and then now all of a sudden it's $799. You're like, "Holy crap,
yeah,
this is such a good deal," and it's like,
right.
well, you kinda like, you gotta understand they
See,
anchored you to 5, so now you're comparing it to
exactly.
5,000, not
And
200.
then if you see that over and over again as a customer, then you start to be like, "Wait a minute, what's going on here?" Right? I mean, if every product is like that, so these things, like, it's important to, like, be strategic in how you use them. I mean, I would recommend, like, trying not to, like, just use it as trickery. Like, show them the reason why this is the case. Why is this suddenly less? What's going on here, right? And then, you know, uh, it's also so many times, and this is a frustrating aspect for me as an actual psychologist. Like, sometimes I think I know too much and it just irritates me. But, you know, I see so many times so-called behavioral experts who, a lot of times it's just someone who read a Malcolm Gladwell book and now they're, a behavioral expert. They position these things as like a bag of tricks, or, magic tricks that will just get your customer to buy, anchoring. Like, oh yeah, no, again, this is feathers on a scale. It's not always, anchoring is what anchoring is. Like, if they hear a big price first, they're a little more open to that second lower price. Yes, that is correct. It's not a magic pill. It's not, it's not, and any of these things where you see someone kind of presenting these things as like, this is the answer. It's not.
Mm,
No, it adds a little bit. It gives you an advantage. Maybe that will be the advantage that tips the scale. Great. But these things aren't, I had a conversation a few weeks ago and someone asked me like, what color should you use on, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, give me a scenario, give me a context, give me like, I'm not gonna like be an advocate for any one color creating motivation. Like, it depends on the scenario entirely, but people are used to that kind of certainty when it comes to this stuff, and
mm,
that really is a mistake.
right. Alright, take me home. Let's go back to the furniture store. What would you do now having known what you know?
I mean, I probably wouldn't do much because it's still going.
Alright, well, then they're doing great.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it's been a fascinating journey. So, I was 4, and it was when they first opened it, it was like almost like a department store. It was like furniture, electronics, they sold carpet, they sold, appliances, um, and over the years, as people, shopped differently, they have adjusted, and it's been like, I think it is so foundational to who I am that I observed all of this. My folks, it's a mom and pop shop. It's never been a you know, huge store. They don't have multiple locations. They don't. It's always just been this one store in this one town, but they know their customers so well that it just guides them for, what strategic decisions to make.
Mm,
So I'll give you an example of, this is probably 10 years ago or so, maybe probably a little more than 10 years ago. They still had appliances, but who's buying appliances from mom and pop
yeah,
stores
yeah.
anymore? Like, it just, and what they were finding was that maintenance, the customer maintenance on appliances was just getting out of hand. Like, anytime there's a problem, they'd go to them. So they had to have repair shop, they had to have like follow up, all the
Ugh,
stuff. And it just got to a point where it was getting too much for them, and it wasn't being profitable anymore. And so we had this long conversation. And one of the things that we realized in the midst of it was that they sold all these things that were big ticket items that, um, the purchase cycle on was very, very long, and so there really wasn't any reason for, people to get up off their couches and come in and check out a new couch, um, And so what they decided to do was open a as part in this within the store, open a boutique that had smaller items, accessories, had some bits of clothing, jewelry,
Hmm,
sunglasses, things like that that were they could switch out frequently. So there was always something new to see, something new to explore. Unfortunately, their physical building is glorious. It's a 122-year-old
hmm,
building that at different various points in time served as like a ballroom, a movie theater, a boxing ring, a mortuary, like all these crazy
cool.
things. And it's just a stunningly beautiful building, and it's just fun to go explore in and of itself. So that's a nice draw, but they needed to have like something to bring people in more frequently. And that made a huge difference. They were actually able to get rid of all the appliances and leave that part behind. So now it's just furniture and boutique.
Mm, very cool.
But all based on, like, observation of what's happening, what's selling, what do we what is the behavior that we want? We want them to come more frequently? Great, well, then we gotta give them a reason.
Sounds like you got a little bit of
So
your human behavior touch from them.
oh, totally, like, yeah, no, they're awesome.
Chris, where can people find you and catch up
Yeah.
with the stuff that you do?
Yeah, a couple ways. One is LinkedIn, you can my handle is Dr.
You got
Chris,
a
so you
really
can
good
find me
LinkedIn, a
there.
big following.
Alright, yeah, awesome. And the other is my website. So, it's thebycologist.com, Bycologist, and you can learn more about me there. And I also have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for there. And I love this newsletter because it is once a month, and I do a deep dive each month into some aspect of consumer psychology. So the very first one is about why you shouldn't trick people into buying stuff. So that's number one. But it gets into things like attention. How do you get it? How do you engage it? How do you use it once you have it? All of that kind of stuff. Emotional engagement. I talk about influencing behavior without feeling gross. All kinds of different. I take a deep dive. So it's not your typical like couple paragraphs. It's usually a bit of a more of a read, which is why I only do it once a month. But it's been really fun to write.
Sweet. I just signed up. They're been coming to my
Woo.
inbox. Can't wait.
Awesome. Awesome.
Chris,
Awesome.
thank you so much, man. This was a lot of fun.
Alex, I appreciate it. This has been great. I love this sort of freewheeling conversation, and you're obviously very good at
Well,
it.
thank you.
So
Thank
I
you.
appreciate
Appreciate
it.
that. Thank you, man. Have a good night.